Hello.
Hey there.
Listeners. Lovely, beautiful, beautiful, special listeners. We love you. You're very special.
We love you, crackers.
Oh, God.
You know what we mean.
It's the spine crackers. People who crack the spines of books because they read them so closely and in depth.
Chiropractitioners. Yes.
The chiropractitioners.
Okay.
Chiropractors.
Wonderful.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Spine Crackers.
I'm your host,
Thank you
Matthew.
for being here. I'm your other host, Paul.
And I'm your third and final host, Gabe.
And together we comprise the entirety of the show you are watching, the three legs that allow this beautiful joint endeavor to stand proudly and provide you with quality, long-form literary analysis and entertainment.
Deep dives, baby.
Deep dives. Informal live discussions. Uncut and raw.
Grown out of a
clip that chat.
Grown out of a wholesome quarantine book club between three dudes.
That's right. And today we are going to be talking about a book that our very own Gabriel has chosen. So we'll let him take it away and describe what he's picked.
Yeah, so the book that I chose for today is called The Museum of Unconditional Surrender, and it's written by Dubravka Ugresic.
Nice.
A lot.
It's fine. It's fine.
That was good. I was like baklava. So it's pretty good.
I'm pretty sure it's croissant. Dubravka Ugresic, who is a Yugoslavian writer, and that sort of term obviously sort of becomes central to the novel because it's about. This was published, by the way. Let's do all that good stuff. This was originally in whatever language they spoke in Yugoslavia, which I think there was a language, maybe Armenian or something. I don't know. 1996 original publication, English translation 99. Again, she's a Yugoslavian author, and this novel is, basically, I would say that it's a kind of a fictionalized autobiography, sort of, right?
It's very intentionally this collection and agglomeration of a bunch of different things,
right?
Which is, her approach to autobiography, which she really voices a lot of hesitance about as a genre, I think, through just the sheer fact of what she's decided to do in lieu of a traditional biography. It's really cool.
It is really cool.
Yeah, so it's like it's sort of an account of, like as Matt said, it's very kind of, it's an agglomeration, it's a mishmash, it's a hodgepodge. There are sort of bits of her memories of childhood, particularly in the first half, and her mother, and sort of her grandparents and various people in her family, and her the town that she was born in, and then those are sort of interspersed with contemporary accounts of her living as essentially an exile from Yugoslavia as it was going through its various sorts of wars and the independence struggles that were going on for the various countries that came out of that part of the world at the time, in Berlin mainly where she lives, although there's a few fragments of her in other places. I thought I thought the chapter when she's in Lisbon is like one of the best like short stories. Really, it's basically a short story, but we can talk about that later. But again, it's these sort of fragmentary bits of her past as a child, her parents, her mother, and her sort of contemporary life and the realities of the wars happening in Yugoslavia at the time.
Yes, and just sort of, the umbrella I guess I would put over all that stuff is the qualities of being in exile in general, and just like what that feels like to the best of her abilities through her own biographical, as she I think like literally says, like kind of like magpie sort of nest like scrap collection that she like gathers around herself.
Yeah. And
well, it's
ahead,
like
Paul.
being in it's the description of people and characters that have been sort of consumed by the stomach of post-Soviet Union countries, I would say, and the idea of the stomach runs throughout the whole book, and it's kind of I think it's quite an impressive metaphor.
Yeah, and there's a lot of metaphors that she uses for that, like that kind of the one that she opens. There's sort of like an author's note at the beginning of the book.
Yes.
That kind of sets the tone, and it's about this, picture at the Berlin Zoo of a walrus who died because he had eaten too many like random, like just literally random shit. Like, and she just lists out all the stuff that this walrus had eaten. Cigarette lighters, like pencils, like plastic water guns, sunglasses, box of matches, like baby's shoes, compasses, and
he has a name.
I'm sorry, Roland, right?
It's Roland the walrus. Just say his name, please.
Say his name.
It's a perfect name for a walrus.
Oh, shit.
And I think also importantly, like he doesn't die
Wally.
from consuming a bunch of random shit. He just dies normally, and then this is what they have to sift through.
Yes.
That remains.
And I think you're right. That's really significant.
Can I read the last? Because immediately. Again, this is already. I love this approach to biography because once again, with this kind of stuff, it jumps around in time. It's very impressionistic. It feels a lot of the times more like a short story collection. And by doing that is, to me, it makes it approach a more accurate description of the feelings of memory and all that kind of shit, and so, but she kind of lays her cards on the table with the thesis, in the first page, and the last paragraph of the first sort of introduction is just it goes like this: the chapters and fragments which follow should be read in a similar way. This is her describing just recently the contents of the walrus's stomach. If the reader feels that there are no meaningful or firm connections between them, let him be patient. The connections will establish themselves of their own accord. And one more thing, the question as to whether this novel is autobiographical might at some hypothetical moment be of concern to the police, but not to the reader.
I love that. Yeah.
Because Dubravka went she left
You on a first name basis, man. I love that.
Dubravka Ugresic.
I think Sich is generally the way that's with the.
I also looked at the Wikipedia, but it was like Cyrillic still.
Oh yeah.
She left.
Oh, that's the language, right?
She left of her own accord, but after being pretty hounded, apparently. This is not something that really comes through, I don't think, in the book so much, but she was a noted sort of intellectual figure all at that point in what I believe became Croatia. Or not became, but just in Croatia, but whatever. I don't really. This is where again.
That's part of it,
Right. It was Yugoslavia, but
when she was born, she was a Yugoslavian, right?
Yeah. And she was, just sort of blanket against violence or I don't know if she was against succession necessarily, but she was sort of just against conflict and war and acts of aggression and the things that were happening with increasing frequency. So she got hounded for that and for kind of being, I don't know what, and threats and stuff. So she basically, I think, just fled eventually.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it too. And again, this is why this is sort of semi-autobiographical, because there's no exact analog to anybody doing that specifically in the text. But of course, there are various characters with various reasons for both leaving and staying in Yugoslavia during the war. And again, if you listen to last week's episode, this month on Spinecrackers podcast is officially complicated texts about complicated periods of history in parts of the world we don't understand.
Yes.
Month.
Yes. Month. And
It was a good learning experience.
I felt a little bad about the Ah Cheng episode just because, like, I think I said this on the show too, but I was just I was lit a little bit too much.
Oh, me too.
It
And
happens.
it was like I don't feel like a little bit like I didn't give it a fair shake. Or I was kind of rambly for that one, which is going to be the same here. But
they can't all be bangers, boys.
No. I mean, in a way, that was a banger. It was just a different take.
yeah, define banger.
Well, true. Fair enough.
We were partying like it was 1999 on that episode.
That's right, which is when this book was published here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But published by New Directions Press. Dear God, sponsor us. We're better than Cliff.
I mean, for the love of fucking Christ, yeah.
We're better than Cliff.
that should be the name of our channel.
Better than Cliff. Better than Cliff book reviews. Holy shit.
Get that better coffee.
Dumb Starbucks.
Dumb Starbucks, dude.
We just Cliff bars and shit.
Yeah, let's
Oh
just
my
eat Cliff
God,
Bars,
that's
drink
so
Folgers.
good. That's so fucking good. So I picked this book kind of because I know we've talked about it a little bit already, but maybe the episode will be fragmented in the same way that the text is. But I picked it because I have a general like very strong interest in Eastern European literature, like broadly speaking. Literature of the sort of, like Paul said, kind of like the Soviet bloc, although Yugoslavia was technically not an SSR. It wasn't like part of the Soviet Union.
Right.
Technically, Tito, who was the, kind of dictator sort of figure at the head of Yugoslavia for most of the time, had a falling out with Stalin, and Yugoslavia kind of tried to sort of be a Switzerland type style figure in those wars, the wars of the Soviet Union. So it was never formally an SSR, but like that part of the world, I love literature from those sorts of countries and just Eastern European in general. And I found this book, and the title was fucking sick, and I was like, let's do it.
Yeah, great
Let's
title.
go.
Great title. 10 out of 10.
Has anyone made a
title.
joke, USSRIs?
USSRIs? No. But when I was
That is a good joke, though.
That is a good joke. And when I was double checking the list of SSRs, the obvious first Google suggestion was SSRIs.
Of course. Do you mean you're depressed and you need to change chemically?
Actually, both.
My favorite, that whole that Tito and the falling out with Stalin. I love. It led to one of my favorite things right at the very end. Just a little phrase that stuck, and I know you know what I'm gonna say, right?
Yeah, I think so. But say it.
The guy selling little busts of Stalin on the street, and he just says, "Come on, buy a daddy."
Buy a daddy.
And he winks at her.
Yep. Or was it Lenin? I thought it was it Lenin or Stalin?
Lenin.
Yeah.
It was Lenin.
But yeah, buy a daddy.
It's like, come on, buy a daddy.
Buy a daddy.
Oh gosh, and I think there are so I don't know how we want to proceed. The book is divided into seven parts roughly, right? They're all of different length. They're all sort of different writing style. Although through some of them, there are these numbered paragraphs that are in order throughout those sections. So every other section is a German title, because she's alternating sort of between her life as in exile in Berlin and these various sorts of considerations from her own past and people that she used to know and things like that. And so there's this kind of like interweaving of the present and the past in the way that the sections proceed as well.
It's so hard. I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out an angle because right, each section takes such a radically different approach to tackling memory and her reckoning with herself and stuff. Like, so I maybe section by section is the only way to really do it.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, not to jump in, too far ahead, but even though it was so disjointed for me, I did walk away with like what I thought the author's maybe point or question she was trying to ask was. I wrote it down mid-read. You want to hear it?
Yeah, baby.
Lay it on us.
Okay. So this is what I thought. If you lose your societal or nationalistic identity, are you destined to lose your self-identity? And does this translate across culturally with each individual who shares your exiled experience? And if you are conscious of that happening, is it still unavoidable? That's like kind of the
Those are good questions.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like that's what she's reckoning with. Like it's a unique situation, right? Being born in a country that over the course of your life ceases to exist. That's not something that's like super common these days. I'm sure that I think there are. It was probably true of some countries in Africa in our lifetimes. Well, like the Sudans and things like that have shifted around, but it's not super common, and I think it's really interesting to think about, like you said, Paul, like what are the implications of that for your identity as a person if you're from a part of the country that dissolves and splits into two countries, and then someone is from a different part of the country that split into a different country. How do you relate to that person? Which is a big part of the book, how she relates to other people that she meets in Berlin who are sort of fleeing the war, and even some of the discussion of her friends. There's a long section at the end, towards the end, about some of her college friends. So yeah, I think these questions of identity and memory is like that's the nuts.
Is it possible to walk away from this experience whatever generation you're in? Because it goes through basically like 3 generations. Like she talks about in one section about her grandmother, which I love that section. Then there's one section that's written from the point of view of her mother in italics, which is all like basically a fake. I assume it's a fake journal entry, which I also loved. But then it goes to her own experience dealing with people that are her own age or younger, around her age. So and it just basically shows this like overall defeatist attitude that is. I think her claim is that it's hard to avoid or unavoidable after your country kind of splits up into, sorry for the metaphor, but into Horcruxes. People like, I kind of,
give the people what they want.
I was kind of picturing like each individual person being a Horcrux of their lost country, and I also
does that make Yugoslavia Voldemort? Because that's problematic.
Yeah, wow.
No, I don't know what Voldemort is, but I also thought about the objects in the stomach, the walrus's stomach. Well, Voldemort uses objects for his Horcruxes.
That's right. That's true, dude.
A great metaphor.
But it is, but it actually is a good metaphor because like it's so much about the way that objects carry identity, right? And that the way that objects carry specifically memories, but the way that memories are kind of like, in many ways, the building blocks of our identities, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's someone sort of brutally is just like, if you don't have memories, then are you a person, right? Like, is it worth being alive? Without them, are you human?
Yeah.
Which is a real actual, to put on my douchebag like academic philosopher hat. Like that's a genuine question in academic philosophy of mind and philosophy of personal identity. Like, are our identities, is the thing that makes me the same person that I was 10 years ago the fact that I have memories of being that person, right? Is that like the determining factor? And I think the book does a really subtle job, and there's a lot in here that I think is like prescient in terms of what we now understand about memory, in terms of like, it's almost all of our memories are false in some way, right? They're agglomerations of things that happened around the same time, things that sort of happened in the same era of our lives with the same people, and we kind of mash them together. And like, there's a very good chance that any memory that you have of any sort of discrete moment in your life is false in some way, that you've added something, that you've subtracted something, that you've put someone there who wasn't there. It was in a different month, a different year even. So that's how we form memory, and there's a lot of that in this book as well.
Well, I underlined this one also, this thing that I think is really relevant. It just it goes, it suddenly seemed that forgetting was just another form of remembering, just as remembering was just another form of forgetting. Which, again, there's... I liked the form of this book because, Ugresic goes through these more elaborate ways of proving these points, or not proving them, but just sort of demonstrating what she feels is the point she's making, and then we'll just sum it up like that at some other point,
I feel that way
Right.
too. Like she had a beautiful writing style, I thought, and I thought that she would, go on somewhat of a tangent about something or other, and then sum up what she just talked about with a line like that just kind of hits nail on the head, and is just rather beautiful. I actually underlined that too. I remember it was,
nice.
it was a good one.
Yeah, and it gets to the point Gay was just making, like, right, the honesty of not besmirching something by remembering it or something strange like that, because when you do, it's remembering. So it's like, there's always a new fucking layer, and the fidelity just slowly dies.
Yes, I think thinking about, like, Paul, your quote about kind of what is she trying to do here? What's the overall kind of goal? I highlighted a passage from a little less than halfway through the book where I feel like she kind of lays out the challenge for herself that she's trying to work through, and which again makes sense that it's kind of coming halfway through, because everything in the book is kind of scattered and thrown in these sort of random areas. And it's on 79, and it's in the section header, which, the sections in this part of the book are just labeled things like borders, or the heavenly tree, or mother's treasure. And this section is just labeled quotation. And it's this long quote from Joseph Brodsky, who's a Russian poet, essayist guy who was essentially forced into political exile from Soviet Russia, the same way that Ugresic was, basically forced into exile from her country for those political reasons.
Run out of town. Yeah,
exactly. there ain't room for the both of us here.
Nah, that's Yugoslavia in a nutshell.
Exactly.
Somebody poisoned the water hole. That was good because Matt's background is Toy Story 5.
Yes.
So
That's right. And if you didn't know, check it. Google image search it.
Yeah, dude. Oof. This video can never go on YouTube, although apparently it can. Matt says.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna read this whole quote because it's all kind of a piece. It's a little bit long, but I think it'll hopefully be illustrative, because I think the last paragraph is like, seems to me to be her throwing down the gauntlet for herself. Like, this is what she's sort of generally like trying to engage in. So this is the Joseph Brodsky quote from an essay or a book of his called Less Than One. Memory, I think, is a substitute for the tale that we lost for good in the happy process of evolution. It directs our movements, including migration. Apart from that, there is something clearly atavistic in the very process of recollection, if only because such a process never is linear. Also, the more one remembers, the closer, perhaps, one is to dying. If this is so, it is a good thing when your memory stumbles. More often, however, it coils, recoils, digresses to all sides, just as a tale does. So should one's narrative, even at the risk of sounding inconsequential and boring. Boredom, after all, is the most frequent feature of existence, and one wonders why it fared so poorly in the 19th century prose that strived so much for realism. But even if a writer is fully equipped to imitate on paper the subtlest fluctuations of the mind, the effort to reproduce the tale in all its spiral splendor is still doomed, for evolution wasn't for nothing. The perspective of years straighten things to the point of complete obliteration. Nothing brings them back, not even handwritten words with their coiled letters. And I kind of think that's like what she's trying to do is like answer that challenge from Brodsky there.
Yeah, I that's a great point. I didn't even pick up really on the self-imposed challenge.
Well, yeah, I underlined that too. I thought that was really good. But I think, like, she definitely has this question about memory, about objects, about photo albums. Those are some of the most prominent objects he talks about. But I like her fixation on, you know, these objects and these photo albums and memory. I think she like actually disagrees with the like. I think her stance is that she doesn't think people should focus on these things. I think that it's like been an issue for all these people that she's known in her life, and it's only brought people misery, like a longing for a past that is now broken, that they can't even like clearly remember anymore, but it's only caused destruction for people that she knows and for her country. But that's kind of what I walked away from. But I think it's open-ended. I'm not sure if I'm correct, but
Yeah, I think I would say she's a slightly more agnostic about it. But I do find it interesting. I did find it interesting. She has her little blurb from On Photography by Susan Sontag, and
Yes.
who shouts out the book in her own actual blurb for the book. But I do find it interesting. Like there is that whole notion of how the role that photographs play, and like there's, you know, the cover of the book, the edition I have, has a photograph that's referenced and also reproduced in the book. And yes, there you go, bathers and the whatever. And it I was curious because like that's something that's certainly dated, I feel now. Like we have photographs or whatever, but it's just like, you know,
They don't fade. They're all digital.
the engagement with the memory and the idea of like faded little framed kind of slices of time and like the fading of them and blah blah blah, and like we even have now just filters to kind of recreate this stuff. Yeah, it made the book more enjoyable, honestly, but the like a little bit of the quaint anachronism of how she regards photos and photography and albums, but the same stuff of like it's still super selective by the people who gather the photos, especially with the description of her mom like never keeping a photograph of her first love.
Yes.
because she just wants to like remember that he was like just a 6'2" god beautiful boy, and
Chad,
like,
man.
not just not just the like little, you know, boy that he actually was and all his imperfections. And like the mom is like also ripping up photographs of herself any older than, I don't know, 40.
Right.
That kind of stuff, like funny little things like that.
Well, and Matt, I wasn't sure if you or Paul, I wasn't sure if you guys got this impression, but like, because you're right, the cover that's on the front of the book, and then on the first, you know, inside of the page is this sort of photo of these three, you know, Eastern European women just bathing in a river, essentially, with their tops on and their like, you know, whatever, head wraps.
Pakra River.
Yeah, and it is not only reproduced visually in the book on the front and on this first page in the edition that we have again, but it's described, I think, like 2 or 3 times. And I feel like the descriptions change, right, a little bit each time.
Yes,
to the point
yes.
to the point that one time in one of the descriptions I was like, is this the same picture that she was talking about before? And like there are details that I think are that morph and are not necessarily representative of like what the picture on the front of the book is. Like I think it changes in subtle ways too throughout the book.
Yeah.
Well, I think that relates to your point earlier, Gabe, about how, like, are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Do your memories and your recollections of those memories change? And can that affect the way you even view or talk about a photograph that, you know, maybe you looked at the photograph 25 years ago and it made you feel a certain way. And then 10 years go by and your view has completely changed. And I think that is a direct representation of how she feels about memory and what you were talking about before too. Is that like you can't rely on memory, even with a photograph. Your views on it will change because you change.
Yes, I not only, and she demonstrates that, I think, like Gabe was saying, in the descriptions of the photo itself.
Yeah.
You know, and also I think I was gonna ask because I didn't really like double check this. I noticed that there were other repetitions. There were just entire blocks of text that were just
Yes.
repeated throughout the book.
Yes.
And I actually I fucking didn't double check to see, but my suspicion is this is true, that there were minor alterations to every single instance of that.
Yep. I didn't check every single instance, but I checked a couple of them, and there are parts that are word for word the same, but then it'll be a word for word the same part, like that fades into a similar part that's different in subtle ways. Like,
I got you.
So there are chunks where it'll be the same exact text repeated for 2 lines, but then the third line will start out the same and then shift halfway through and then go back to being the same a line later.
Right.
So it's those sorts of like subtle little performative things that she's doing in the text as well. Yeah.
Damn.
I'm gonna read. I want to read something early on page 25, which I think it does point to her view being that these obsessions with photographs isn't actually healthy for her or her mother. It's right in the middle of the page. Sometimes I would come across her leafing through albums, hers, her mother. Then she would close the one she was holding, take off her glasses, and put them down and say, "Sometimes I feel as though I have never lived, ... Life is nothing other than a photographed album. Only when it is the album, only what is in it, the album, I can't fucking read. Only what is in the album exists. What is not in the album never happened," says a friend of mine. And I just read these two passages back to back as her, seeing her mother kind of just the dangers of nostalgia through her mother are just coming into play. And I think she wrote this, quote from a friend down basically disagreeing with that notion, though. I mean, she's displaying it, but as a way to argue against it.
What that nostalgia is corrosive, or that it
Or that if it's not documented, or if there's no memory, it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think that she
okay.
disagrees with that.
I don't know. I think I tend to side on more of the like maybe what Matt said, that she's sort of agnostic, because like certainly like one of the like anxieties that she expresses in the book beautifully is like this country that she was born in basically just being pulled out from underneath her feet and feeling like a huge part of her identity is like thrown into chaos, and that of course like bleeds into other sorts of anxieties about death, because there's war going on, and like friends that she speaks to and then kind of who fade out of her life. And she's I mean, we all have friends like this, right, where people you're just kind of like every 6 months you're kind of like, wonder what they're doing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's this sort of question of if something disappears in that fashion or fades away in that fashion, like is it effectively the same as it never having been in the first place? Especially if you don't really remember it, or if it doesn't sort of change you in any powerful way.
Yeah, and these questions are accelerated by her displacement. I don't know what she thinks overall, like concretely again about this, but like the fact of her not having the geographical continuity of a nationality, it does seem to be fucking with her like heavy. like she is now relegated to trying to garner continuity through her memory almost exclusively, while never having a sort of permanent address. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I do think the overall impression I got was that this does seem to erode her sense that she will ever be a what's the word? Like an individual who's not got a certain level of porousness and just the blurred, defining outlines or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, she feels unpersoned, I think, and I don't think she ever loses it ever.
Yeah.
Well, and I think most of the characters she describes too are like that. Also, like one of my favorite chapters, or I don't know what you would want to call it, is the one where she meets this woman named Lucy. Remember
Yes,
that chapter?
dude.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
one of my favorite characters. Lucy's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, Lucy.
Yeah,
Owens.
that whole chapter was amazing.
So
But,
why was that? Why did you like that part so much?
I thought that Lucy just had a great characterization about someone who had just this defeatist attitude and was clearly affected by what the narrator was affected by too, just in her own way. She was like kind of destroyed in her own way and segmented into this person who was like overly emotional and ends up just kind of alienating everyone she's ever come in contact with. And she keeps describing how, like, every interaction she has with someone, they end up forgetting about her. Like the narrator, when they first meet, Lucy's like, "Oh, I know you. Like, do you remember me?" And she's like, "No, I'm sorry." And then she says, like, "Oh, I'm Lucy, whoever." She's like, "Yeah, I have no memory of who you are." But they kind of have this, they get coffee, I think, and they have this like strange meeting in the coffee shop. And at one point, Lucy like puts her hands on her in a weird way. And she keeps calling her like, "You're my long lost sister," or something. And it kind of freaks the narrator out. But I don't know. I just thought that it was like a very personalized depiction of a broken person in this landscape. And it was affecting. And I got to try to find it because the last line was, I got to find the last line, but give me a minute.
Yeah, Lucy, she's just described as this very, like, thin, nervous, super neurotic person who, I don't know, Ugresic kind of, like, is disgusted by her in a way.
Yes.
Her approach is so antithetical to what Ugresic's preferred self-conception, maybe you could call it, of how she should comport herself is that, like, she's just like, "Ugh," like it's this.
Right.
She almost says she's an emotional vampire. Like Lucy just sort of goes like, she's too confessional. She's too like, do you like me? Like, she gets emotionally invested and instantaneously in this kind of stuff, which I agree with you, Paul. Like, her characterization, I knew this person so fast, which impressed me when I was reading the segment. I was like, fuck yeah, I know I've met this type of person. Like,
yeah,
like someone who maybe this is the angle, like someone who, because they feel forgettable and just sort of like unsure of their living reality day to day as an individual, thinks that the angle to take there is to impress upon you way too much confessional material about their personal life and their emotional state at every given second, in lieu of intimacy or something, or like, you know what I mean, to like do a speed run on many years of relationship and friendship and that kind of thing, and it never works.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know people like this too. I think everyone does. But I also think this encapsulates the idea of memory too. It encapsulates a lot of the whole book in this story to me. But I want to read. It's on the second to last page, 116 of the chapter. This relates to the idea of memory. Lucy lit another cigarette and called the waitress. She gazed into my face and said tenderly, in her slight nasal voice, "You had your hair cut. It suited you better long. I never had it long." "It was longer." "Yes, it was longer," I said appeasingly. And that like kind of sums up their whole relationship, where she just wants to like get Lucy the fuck away from her. But it also, I think, encapsulates the idea that Lucy's memory is not totally right either. Maybe Lucy never even knew this person. She's just insane.
Well, and I think specifically in that scene, Lucy was getting drunk, right? Like Lucy was getting, they were drinking, I forget what, but I'm pretty sure Lucy was starting to get this is
No,
like she has to get her a car, doesn't she?
No, she was seeming to get drunk, but the key there is that Dubrovich notices that she's not even finished the only glass of wine she's been drinking. She's not actually physiologically drunk. She's getting drunk off of her own, like continual putting herself on more and more limbs that she had already clearly planned to do from the beginning. Like each progressive movement more towards like the confessional mode and laying herself on the line, like had some kind of like weird intoxicating effect on her, and it wasn't alcohol.
I think that's true, and I also think there might be an element of her just her characterization being someone who actually doesn't like getting drunk and is just pretending to be liked, which I found creepy.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, we're getting drunk, so I should act drunk now, and that was just a scary.
The consensus, I think, right, is Lucy would be a lot to deal with, and not in a fun way.
And to me, like the part where I was like, oh my god, like this, just getting to the characterization of like we know this person was at the end of that chapter, like just on the next page, where she says, a few days later, I called an acquaintance, an East European writer in exile who lives in New York. I hear that you met Lucy Skurzel-Delko, he said. How do you know? She called me a couple of days ago, and she told me a lot about you. What did she tell you? She said you were too emotional. Simply too emotional.
I was actually planning to read that too, because
so mad. Like it just makes me so mad because I know that person.
Yeah, I love that characterization element. It's the climax of how crazy this person is. She's calling her friend the emotional one when she knows that, not her friend, but she knows the narrator thinks that of her, and it's a weird thing that is true in those types of people. They'll turn something against the other person,
and everything's a foregone
creepy.
Conclusion, which is what's so suffocating about those kind of people as well. She's just like, I know you're gonna hate me, just like the person that meets you immediately and is like, oh my god, yes. I'm actually a lot. Yeah. And you're going to hate me, and it's like, yeah, I bet I am, because you've decided. It's just like, ugh.
It's bad juju, very bad juju.
Yes, sir.
I think that like there are so many moments of that subtle but like just so real characterization in this story. Like I was thinking about the chapters about her mother, and like specifically the sections where she's like getting these voicemails from her mom and like not calling her back. God, and like there's so like, hi mom. First of all, hello, love you mom. Mm-hmm. But it there was so much truth in those moments and so much like sadness, her mother calling her and her listening to her voicemails on the sort of phone, smoking like over and over again, and like not calling her back, and it was just so real.
I was thinking about how the load bearing moments for me were the like more I don't know if this is like me being sentimental or something, but it was like the more I don't know well rendered personal accounts, but that includes Lucy, even though it's such a short moment. But her mom, bro, like, broke my heart because she was like she sounded like an actually like cool woman and like who was truly depressed, and like just those phone calls and just her being like the whole Paul, you were saying that I kind of like entire italicized, maybe made up, maybe actual real verbatim journal entries.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Those were sad. They were very sad.
That was sad.
Well, and then she ends up dying. They describe like these instances where she's slowly getting sick, right? And then she ends up dying of some disease. Isn't that what happens? I can't totally remember.
Well, she gets sick and then she gets better, right?
Yeah.
Like she's in the hospital and then she gets better and comes back out, I think, for a while.
Just like Dubrovich like looking at her and like just being like, I hope my face doesn't ever get that Ugresic doesn't get that slack and vulnerable looking. Just like her like shitty personal like being like, I know I'm starting to look like my mom. I hope I never get this face, or like I look this helpless. Like really dark, good stuff.
Well, I think that that translates for me to my question about the overall, not my question, but it's an example of how, her mom's environment and her life, this might be a generalization or an obvious statement, but how it was unavoidable for her to not be affected by what was happening in her country and the surrounding states. And it translates to almost everything about her life, her relationships, and even the way that she physically looks. I think that her mother, wasn't she described as being like a pretty good looking younger woman? And I think that she just, slowly degrades and looks worse and older than she actually was. And I mean, maybe that happens to everybody, but it was still.
It does.
It does. But I mean,
Forever young.
it's like she
Forever young.
didn't happen to David Bowie. Maybe not till the very end.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Well, he was actually killed by. He definitely got a little assisted suicide action going so he could get his record out in an artistically good moment, which is honestly awesome.
Chad.
Yeah, that album's really good.
Yeah.
I think another chapter that really affected me too was the one about her grandmother.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to read a bit about the mother. It's long, but like this is some of the best writing that I feel like I've read maybe since we started doing this podcast. So I feel like it's worth reading. This is again her sort of listening to her mother's voicemail, not calling her, and kind of thinking about. So anyone who's fucking failed to call their mom back, I think should
Buckle
be able
in.
to relate to this. Buckle in for some feels. I definitely teared up when I read this the first time. Instead of her number, I dial the speaking clock. 11:55 and 3 seconds, says the voice. I sit silently, holding the receiver against my face, caressing it, rubbing my cheek against the cold plastic. 11:55 and 5 seconds, says the monotonous voice. I open my mouth as though I'm going to say something. I form it into a little circle for some little round words. 11:55 and 7 seconds, says the voice. Soundlessly, I pronounce, "Hello, here I am. It's Bubby," which is what her mother calls her. The little balloon words rise into the air. 11:55 and 10 seconds, says the voice. The little balloons hover, swarm around me like moths. Time pours indifferently out of the receiver, cooling my weary temples. I imagine her in bed. She's reading something. Her eyes sting. She slowly takes off her glasses, shuts the book, and places her glasses on it. She sits up, sits for a moment on the edge of the bed, swinging her legs, crumbling the darkness with her toes. Then she looks at her swollen hand, puts it under the bedside lamp, and examines it carefully. She picks up the remote control, turns on the television, changes channels. There's an empty screen on all of them. The emptiness hums monotonously. Snow seeps from the screen into the room. She turns off the television, goes lazily to the bathroom. There she sits on the toilet for a long time, crumbling the air with her toes, urinating. In the half-darkness, she listens to her own sound. From the bathroom, she goes to the kitchen. She doesn't turn on the light. She opens the fridge, stares at the illuminated display, looking for something. On the white wire shelves are a yogurt, a carton of milk, a little piece of cheese, a mouse's supper. She closes the fridge without taking anything. She goes over to the window, touches the velvety leaves of the African violets in the dark. She leans against the windowsill, smoking, gazing into the darkness. Beneath her, large green leaves rustle and glint. Illuminated by the moonlight, they look like silver trays. In a year or two, the green trays with a metallic sheen will reach right up to her window. Large-leaved trees grow so quickly. She hears her heart beating in the darkness. Pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. She feels touched, as though there were a lost mouse inside it, beating in fright against the walls. She strokes the velvety leaves of the violets, soothing her heart. Here and there, a pale light glows in the windows of neighboring buildings. In one, she sees a dark, motionless figure of someone smoking. In another, a motionless woman is leaning on the sill, smoking. She watches the woman like her reflection in a mirror. 3 pins of light, 3 sparks, glimmering in the darkness. The luxuriant leaves absorb the thin mist of smoke. She feels a sudden desire to wave to them. She rejects the idea but smiles, concealed in the darkness, and she imagines her hand moving, her little discreet signal with her finger, and she imagines the 2 smokers in the dark sending her the same signal. And I was just like, fuck, I gotta call my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good writing. I mean, I was having some flashbacks to Jean Stafford a little bit, and a little bit of Simonon too. I would put her writing up there with either of those, which is high praise. I just thought she nailed those kind of terrible characterizations of old age and sadness.
This is also something that, like, I don't know. I'm not sold on this notion even myself, but just like biography at its best kind of allows for this really like ripping intimacy if done correctly. That makes it still, I don't know. It's such a lampooned genre that lends itself a lot to like the worst habits of people. But like if you can be honest with yourself, I suppose, and shine a really garish light on parts of your life, you can get at things that touch a lot more than just the people in your than you in your own circumstances. Like, because normally I just think of like fucking like one man shows where it's just like, hey Johnny, come in. It's just like one of these like stage performances where it's just like a guy's like, hey, and there's Uncle Tony on the porch smoking sausages again. Like, that's classic, fucking Bed-Stuy street life. And there's my Uncle John. He always loved the pack. And you're just like, boo.
Well, and then the my like what you're saying, Matt. My first reaction is that fucking book that was. I don't even remember when this was, in the mid 2000s. I want to say maybe early 2010s. That guy who published that, like, it was marketed originally as a memoir, and he's like a drug addict, and it was like so hard hitting.
Million Little Pieces.
Million Little Pieces. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was all fucking made up.
It's fake.
And like, so I think that like is a perfect kind of example of what you're saying, like biography being this like, again, it's kind of a maligned genre in a way, and it's sort of like either that kind of one man show type thing, or it's this like overly dramatic, like here's just a list of horrible shit that's happened to me, and like how bad is that?
Right. Yeah. It's just like high drama, or it's incredible banal. I think it's the preferred mode now because there's a lot of. I feel like there's a little bit of an overemphasis on like write what you know, and therefore write autobiographical or autoethnographical stuff in a certain mode.
But
this is both to me anyway as an American, and it's just honestly this is one of the best books I've read in a long time.
Yeah, me too.
Spoilers.
I love this one.
Yeah, spoilers.
Same.
Yeah, there's a lot of just like direct autobiographical stuff for sure, but there's enough fictionalized elements in there that, I think she uses it to twist what she's trying to say to her own way. I would even say there's a little bit of magical realism, right?
Oh yeah.
In the chapter about when she meets that lover on the streets of Berlin.
His
name
in Lisbon.
Lisbon.
In Lisbon.
Yeah. What is his name? Antonio.
Yeah.
Antonio.
God, that was such a sad. Oh man, that was like one of the saddest and most beautiful parts of the book. I'm saying that about everything we're talking about.
I know, but I really love this one too. I mean, it was sad and beautiful, but one of my favorite parts about it is that like she knew everything that was happening while it was happening. Like she knew she was falling for this guy, this younger guy, but she like was just going along with the affair, the romance, and knew when he was lying. He was kind of like a scumbag and kind of lying about.
He was basically like a long form prostitute. Like he was playing like the long game.
Yeah. Con man.
Yeah.
And Paul, this kind of folds back on a point you made way back at the beginning of of the podcast, which is like, does your consciousness of something occurring in any way stop it from occurring? And I think this is. I don't know. I think it's not a resounding no, but it's basically no. It's basically a no.
It's like, it's a resounding 99% no.
What you can do is be more verbal about it and have more kind of Baroque memories to then endlessly reflect on afterwards. But basically, it's a no.
Yeah.
I think you're so. I kind of want to talk more about the night in Lisbon specifically, but like the section in which that story is situated is basically a collection of like very short kind of stories. It's part 4. It's on page 109 is where it starts, and the title of the section is Archive: 6 stories with the discrete motif of a departing angel.
Right.
And that also comes back in the next section, the idea of an angel as a sort of like magical realist element. But like, there's so many weird. This is where the story of Lucy first happens. But there's so many weird little moments. You know, she talks about her Middle Eastern roommates, I think, right? Or are they?
No, Indian.
Indian, pardon me. She talks about living with like a group of Indian roommates who she's like not really getting along with, and like the end of that story is so strange, where basically I'll just read it. Like, she's confronting them about something in their kitchen. You know what you know this? You remember this?
I know they're making way too much noise in the bathroom.
Yes.
And she's just brought to tears almost by the like repeated offense of them being loud.
Which, by the way, I have been brought to tears by roommates making too much noise in the bathroom.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
But there's this bizarre moment at the end of that story, which, Paul, I just wanted to highlight because you brought up this like this vein of magical realism that kind of runs through this text. So this is her going to confront them about the noise I think that they're making in the kitchen or something. With a sudden movement, I open the door of my room and find them at the kitchen table, motionless in a shaft of light. They exchange frightened glances. I stand like that, holding my breath. The kitchen is filled with a silence as sharp as a knife. And then, as though in a slowed-down film, Uma gets up, lifts her nightdress of floral flannel, reveals thin, almost boyish thighs and genitals covered in thick, black feathers with an oily sheen exactly like a bird's. With her fingers bent into pincers, Uma slowly plucks a feather and hands it to me with a conciliatory gesture. "Thanks," I mutter stupidly. I'm blushing. I take the feather and don't know what to do with it. She looks at me with the expression of a beaten animal, lowers her eyes, bends her head a little as though expecting a blow, and drops her nightdress. And the feather is a sort of symbol that is used repeatedly as well. That the sort of gifting of a feather happens a couple times in the story too.
That's why this story is stealing from Forrest Gump.
Ooh.
And it's basically just Forrest Gump 2.
The Museum of Bubba Gump Shrimp Co.
That's right, Booby Gump Shrimp.
Booby Gump. Oh my god, dude. That's niche.
Actually,
that's niche.
I was thinking more of The Factory, honestly, but
Yes.
I
Well,
was
yeah.
thinking of Black Swan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny
I
because
don't know.
right, you were saying. Sorry, let me just one thing. She gets like this black feather, and then later on, when she's describing a visitation by an angel again, everyone gets a white feather of oblivion. So I just feel like this is like she gets these grimy, fucked up memories that don't get to leave her. Whereas I don't know if she rightly should say this, but like her friends get to exist sans these highly specific memories.
Yes.
With the white feather that they're bequeathed.
Yeah, we should probably talk about that section because it seems to me to be a pretty important chunk of the book. The last thing I want to say about this section, this archive, sort of with the motif of the angels and stuff, and we can maybe come back to the Lisbon story, but this book was published originally the same year, and I think this is just kind of an interesting synchronicity as a work of philosophy by Jacques Derrida called Archive Fever, and Derrida was interested in that text in questions of digital memory. He was specifically kind of worried about email, and he's mobilizing Freud, and Derrida was always very interested in things like writing letters and friendship and sort of like, what the implications of digital culture and digital interaction meant for human interaction and memory. And so he wrote in, again, the same year this book was published, 1996, this book Archive Fever, sort of working through some of the psychoanalytic Freudian implications of his understanding of digital culture, specifically email, right? This is the late 90s. Derrida was not on Facebook. But I just think it's interesting that this book was published in the same year as that book. And she's so explicitly and in such a detailed way engaging with the archive and the idea of archivization and like, the way our identities are shaped by the sort of memories and items and in some cases physical objects that we collect. I just thought that was worth mentioning as something that stuck out to me as interesting. I don't have a unified theory of reading Ugresic through Derrida, but the fact that those two books were published in the same year, I think, is interesting.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, there's
again,
a little. Oh,
just that archiving is now just even more an important thing. That's all. It's become an even more, I think, vital topic now. But that's it.
I was going to say maybe it just is some sort of synchronicity, or maybe it relates to like the phenomenon of cultural collectivism or cultural consciousness. That could, also relate to it. I'm not 100% sure, but it definitely is interesting to think that they came out in the same year.
Well, and ultimately, right, like the title of the book refers to an actual museum that exists, and in real life it does exist. I looked it up. It has a different name now, at least, but it's this kind of out of the way, like sleepy museum in Berlin that details like the Russian occupation from a Russian perspective. And the way she describes it is so like weird and sad, and like, again, like links up with this idea of the personal archive with the way that we socially archive these things, the way we socially archive these memories and culturally archive these memories for, who knows what use in the future.
And imagine though her finding this museum and just being like, yes, fuck yeah, dude, my book has a goddamn controlling idea and like symbol in a physical location in the city I'm exiled in. I'm so pumped. So I like to imagine her being pleased about that discovery.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't know if she's pleased. I mean,
pleased to her degree
I don't know.
of capability.
That being pleased while being totally agnostic, as you've been saying. I think that would probably be a good her reaction.
Well, I don't actually know. I didn't really look up like how long she sat with this book or like how long it took her to write. I mean, we got the like publication dates, and I would imagine since it's about exile, and I think she left then Yugoslavia in like 93, and if this came out in 96, so I guess like about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Like, yeah, she's been sitting with these notions of how to describe the texture and feeling of being in exile, which is definitely something I have not, certainly none of us, most people, would not have come close to understanding.
No, I think it's something that, we can't directly relate to in any form. We haven't lived that experience, so we can't totally empathize with it. But that's why it's good to read fiction and learn about someone else's perspective.
100%. And that's why you should listen to us and then...
Yes.
But then read the book, obviously. I mean, honestly, we're assuming you have whenever you listen to something like this, but...
You don't have to. I did want to read one little thing and go back to the angels a little bit in this section.
Yeah.
It's in the Lisbon chapter at the second to last page. So this is when like Antonio, they're kind of like parting ways, and this is like the last time she sees him.
He got the money already.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it's not going to pay her back. Images mingled in my head, and suddenly Antonio's naked back flashed across my mind, stopping for an instant as though expecting something. I saw myself approaching him from behind, passing my tongue over the edges of his shoulder blades, following the path of two small mother-of-pearl scars. One on each shoulder blade, I saw myself moistening with my compassionate saliva the places where, until recently, there had been wings. So it's like, it basically saying that he was like an angel and that his wings were cut off. It just relates to this like angel feather type motif that
Yeah.
I have an idea about, but I think it's a little too simple.
I mean,
Maybe
I have
you guys can. You go ahead.
my like rough guess of just that whole sequence was more just about I don't know, like not the demystification, but your conception of somebody initially just being way higher, and then the particulars and things happening over time, just turning them from this almost otherworldly being into, that you kind of like met through providence, and it's like, it just, all of it's so charged with meaning. And then eventually, like, it's just like, a de-winged angel, somebody who's just a person who's now just got the scars of what your previous conceptions of them were.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, but when I think about that, I think I agree. But when I think about the passage that Gabe wrote about the roommate showing her feathers and being kind of ashamed after showing them, I think my takeaway from this section was more like maybe just like a simple fall from grace. Like all these people have no ability to be that angelic person that they were not supposed to be, but could be. There's too much that has happened to each of these characters that is preventing them from having wings or having feathers. And I did like the aspect that she was like shameful of her feathers too. Like she just kind of like, she didn't want him there or something. Like she didn't even want to face the fact that she could be someone that she wasn't.
Yeah. But I do, I'm kind of with you though in the sense that this was such a controlling idea for the like half of the book that I feel like I've got a little bit of an insufficient take on, or whatever,
Yeah.
I watched that movie Wings of Desire, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But it still didn't help.
Yeah,
Forrest Gump would have helped.
It was a cool ass movie. And
Gump
you should watch it. Forrest Gump was more of a thing of, right?
Forrest Gump. I mean, yeah.
I think Forrest Gump, when he invents shit happens, remember the sticker?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what this book is about, and I figured it out.
This book, like, basically in Forrest Gump, when he's like running for a long time, that's basically like all the exiles like running to different places around the world to get away from it.
He's like the universal refugee.
Yeah, exactly.
Fleeing.
Whoa, okay, wait, hold
Whoa,
on. That might be
bro.
something there.
Bro.
Bro.
It's like, now all I'm thinking of is, do you ever watch that movie Human Traffic?
No.
No.
Where they all take ecstasy, and then the one guy's like talking about Star Wars as though it's like this. He's like, Darth Vader's out there, and he's looking. It's about like the fucking like club culture in the UK, and he's like, Darth Vader, he's out there in this starship looking for outer space. He's trying to conquer outer space. And Yoda, man, he's trying to conquer inner space. And everyone's like, oh. And then they all come down from drugs and they're like, that was incredibly stupid.
Well, as the resident Star Wars expert on the pod, it's not stupid. It's true. Actually, it's not true. It's actually totally false, because the Jedi were deeply imperialistic, very problematic, especially at their heyday.
And if I learned anything, it's that the midichlorians are the powerhouse of the cell.
There's a school of thought that says that the midichlorians are there's actually no scientific basis, and it's basically just a story that the Jedi made up to keep class distinction.
Whoa, shit, wow.
Anyway, that's Patreon only content.
That's the kind of shit that'll get us in trouble with the government.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to reel it back to the mom again, just because.
Yes.
There was two things. The mom, again, because this is still, I would regard as a biography, and therefore, like, this figure, I don't really, like, her dad's just not in the picture, eh? Like,
yeah, I don't remember anything distinct about her father. Like, she talks about, yeah, go ahead. Paul, do you remember?
Well, I know that he wasn't in I know that he was just not in the picture, but she describes her mom dying and then her dad dying, like, years afterwards. So
she mentions his death, yeah.
So yeah, they just
Okay.
weren't
They just
together.
Yeah.
But I don't think her father was in her picture.
So this is like, again, this is this is Ugresic talking about a memory of her mother, and then again I want to pair it like 30 pages later with a memory of like her mother immediately after her death, I believe, or after her receiving of all of these or reading all of these like journal entries. And I love this. It's so it just goes, the pure silk scarf. Mother always emphasized the word pure. Had been sent by my grandmother in a letter. That little breath of silk smuggled in an ordinary letter opened a crack in the door to the unknown. The words pure silk worked like a magnet to attract other words of obscure meaning. The word emerald among others. I used to enjoy rolling the unusual word emerald round on my tongue, as though I were rolling a hard green menthol sweet round in my mouth. Which is just a beautiful description of like
Yes.
these weird. I don't know how to describe this myself, but like these weird fixations to words and objects and stuff in a childlike manner when you're very young. How there's like a sort of magnetic or gravitational pull that certain like textural objects and words and stuff, especially spoken by adults when you're young, that just have this weird import to you just because of the happenstance of who you were born around and then what they choose to say. And how that's like the first sort of like skewing of memory towards certain directions very specifically that are unique and individualistic. And then I just want to pair it with this other thing. So that was that was page 15, and then this is 50. I ask myself what is left, because here in the palm of my hand are the shells of her language, her identity, touchingly misused accent marks, intonations which only I hear, words whose meaning only I know, her handwriting which changes depending on her mood, self-censorship which only I sense. To start with, I began fiddling with feeble ideas about genre, hoping in a sly corner of my mind for literary effects, but now I'm just in its painful center, as in quicksand, and I can't get out. I love that description, like the artistic project endeavored, and then still just getting caught up in the sheer fact of your own accumulated memories around the people you're trying to fictionalize and aestheticize and all this kind of stuff. It's just I love that.
And there's such a like the other thing that we haven't like necessarily really touched on yet is that there are significant chunks of this book that are basically dedicated to like short form essays on art criticism. Like there's a lot of her describing various artists and their installations, and sometimes she meets them as actual characters in a story, sometimes not. And
well, what you could say is Kunst. What is it?
Right. Yes, that's the title. The title of the second to last section, I think, or no, the third to last. Was ist Kunst?
Was ist Kunst?
Was ist Kunst? What is art? Know. What is art?
Yeah, I do want to talk about. I want to go back and talk about what Matt was talking about in a second, because I want to talk about her grandmother a little bit more. I want to talk about more characterization in terms of like being able to connect with maybe your younger self. I think she has a huge ability to do that in a beautiful way. But yeah, I did want to read. I picked up on the art criticism a lot too, and there's one line on 169. Where she's talking to Richard, the artist, who's kind of obsessed with like gathering little knickknacks, and he like obsesses over the pavement in Berlin, and thinks that it's like the most unique pavement, and no pavement is like this anywhere in the whole world.
It tells a story, man. It tells a story.
But I think this is probably the strangest thing I've ever read about someone's opinion on what art is. It's from this guy, Richard. And it's under that 83 mark. With our feet on the empty seat in front of us, Richard and I sit under the vast cupola of the planetarium in Prunzler Alley, That was great, wasn't it?
Beautiful.
A starry rain falls on us from the sky, and while the tiny artificial stars fall over us, I ask quietly, "What is art, Richard?" "I don't know. An act which is certainly connected with mastering gravity, but which is not flying," says Richard. I was like, what the hell are you talking about?
Hell yeah.
It's one of the craziest things I've ever heard.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it too.
Well, and again, right, like that last scene where that's a repeated moment in this section where she's looking up at the like on the hill, right, like looking up into the sky, like that. Those few lines are, again, getting back to Matt's point earlier about the repetition, and I think like it's interesting because that section is repeated. The phrase sort of like was ist Kunst, like, is repeated over and over again to various characters, and that's the first time it's said in English, written written in English to Richard. And I just think it's this interesting, like, little minute variations in the way the repetition is done in the text.
I like Richard too. He just seems like a cool artist, eccentric in Berlin, who's like essentially trying to just what's the word? It seems like he's doing a lot of the putting objects in strange contexts in order to alienate people from their original use. But also he's obsessed with like the lineage or whatever, like the continuity of narrative that is possible within like shitty rusted out coffee cans and broken chairs and stuff. I kind of like that.
It's funny because like Richard, along with a number of other characters in the book, are real people. Richard Wentworth is a real... Oh, am I muted?
Mute yourself. Mute. There you go.
There you go.
I did the thing where I had the double...
you sounded like a big man for a second.
I mean, I am.
You sounded like a robot big man.
Are you calling me fat?
No.
Whoa, chilled.
But a lot of the characters in this book that she references, specifically in the sections about art, are real people, right? I don't know. I don't know if she's ever met them or like what their interactions, like how realistic these depictions are. But Richard Wentworth is a real artist, a real British artist. And when she first introduces him in this section, there's a footnote that I think is really funny. And she says, Richard Wentworth, she introduces Richard, and the footnote is, Richard Wentworth, an English artist. Any similarity between Richard and himself is intended and accidental.
Right.
It's great. Great sense of humor throughout this book, too. We haven't really talked about that, but she has a great sense of humor.
And she's an established intellectual.
Yeah, she's an academic.
And she's already in that realm, firmly established at that point. So
the telling thing that I took away from this chapter was that I liked Richard, too. And I think he had like more of a grounding than a lot of the characters, more of like a sense of purpose. But I also thought it was telling that he wasn't from this area. He was English. And I think that relates to her, I can't say her freaking name, Ugresic. I think it relates to her view on how maybe people from her country, from this split apart Horcrux of a world, they can't, they're going to have a tough time finding a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, Berlin itself, right? She saves a lot of quotes from maybe her second most referenced, not even in a little epigraph, but in the text, writer Shklovsky. Victor Shklovsky. I'm maybe we're all mispronouncing everything, but I think that's right. Describes Berlin as just like, this dead museum, bifurcated like a brain, you know what I mean, by the wall, and just like all this kind of stuff. Like, it's not a real place. It's an
the
aspirational.
Museums are run by like confused archaeologists. I forget the exact term, but I like that.
Yeah,
it's like an archaeological town where they're just like confused about what they should be.
It's just made of debris.
Collecting.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the description towards the end of the book of the flea markets, right, in Berlin, where there's all these old, I mean, not even old really at the time, but sort of these intermingling, you could buy a Nazi officer's uniform alongside, some toy from a country the Nazis occupied. And like, again, it's just one of these other sort of physical manifestations of like her understanding of memory, right? We have these like albums, these family albums and photography. We have the walrus. We have these flea markets. We have all of these various ways that she's trying to get at kind of the operation of memory, I think.
Yeah, and I think I forget the exact quote, but one of you guys read it earlier where I think it was Matt, where you said, she said remembering is self-destruction or something like that. It wasn't self-destruction, but remembering is like...
Oh, just forgetting is a form of memory and remembering is a form of forgetting.
Yeah, and I think that these people's fascinations with these objects from this bloody past is, it's their form of trying to remember, but it's also their form of trying to forget, but it's also self-destructive, I would say. I mean, that's my view. I'm not sure if that's her view, but
I think it's interesting because it's self-destructive, but it's also self-preservative, because there's this other character, right? Like Zoran, who keeps making this point that like, and he's in exile too from Yugoslavia. I forget exactly where from, but he keeps repeating this phrase like, we're all museums now. Like, we are all walking museums. Like, we are the archives. We are the museums of this time and place that is no longer, that literally doesn't exist anymore. And so it's both this process of self-destruction in a way, or it's process of dealing with destruction, but it is also a sort of pickling, right? It's like a sort of self-preservation and trying to hold on to those things that were so constitutive of your identity for so long.
I think that's a good... I like the word pickling there. Because one idea I had, or thought I had towards the end of the book too, is when it came back to the walrus stomach. I think that this idea of the stomach is such a strange one to me, and I can't totally wrap my head around it. But I wrote something down towards the end. I wrote the objects, like that, in the flea markets and objects in the stomach, are, I think, what she considers people to be. And they're not being digested by the stomach. And I thought that, this aftermath in this world is kind of this, like, it felt really close and enclosed to me. Like, everywhere she talked about going, this whole, life's journey she went on, it felt like she was in this bubble, and it reminded me of a stomach. But she also, it just also reminded me that, like, but what I couldn't wrap my head around, though, is that, like, does she think that because people and these objects can't be digested, does that mean if you were digested that you would be living a better life? Would you be thriving in this stomach? And that's I'm not sure if I'm on the right line of thinking, but I
think it's
it was
really
kind of a
interesting
doomy
question.
view for me, is that, like, if she sees her world as a stomach, then would being digested be the right course of action?
I mean, I think right is maybe too strong a word, but certainly appealing and potentially would save a person from... I think it's just more like integration is the way of, like, describing digestion there, right? Like, which I think, again, comes back in the story about, like, all her friends being bequeathed these white feathers of oblivion by an angel. I think it's just same thing.
Because digestion is also ultimately nutritive, right? Like, you digest
right
in order to, feed or sustain something else. But in the process of doing that, the thing that is digested is transformed or disappeared or,
Integrated.
No longer what it is. You're right. Yeah, integrated.
and turned into shit.
And ultimately
that's a
turned
good
into shit.
that's
right.
a good point, because after this I wrote, in the chapter about the actual museum, I wrote, the museum is the colon. And
No, I like that a lot.
I kind of saw it as that, like, if we're thinking about this in terms of a digestive tract, I saw this museum as the very end of the line and the worst part of the system.
Right, waste material that you of a no longer existing thing, right? Broken down to its constituent parts that don't matter and are unwanted. Like that's the thing. Like I remember, like there's a part where like her and her friends are just recollecting random Yugoslavian products.
Yeah.
There is an interesting like consumerist kind of note at the very end of the book, I would say, and it starts, I believe, with all these friends remembering different brands of, I don't know, like Yugoslavian coffee and the first TV show on Yugoslavian television and this kind of stuff. And I think it was important that all those things were just things that these people consumed that now were very pregnant with meaning because they didn't exist any longer.
Yeah, I like thinking about the idea of more of from a capitalist consumerist viewpoint, because this book kind of reminded me a little bit of Dirty Snow in a lot of ways, but I think in one way it's told in such a personal way that those issues about the world, they come into play in their own way, but they're never direct. And I think the idea of consumerism was, for these people, was such like an undriving force in their desire to go to these flea markets and buy these objects and look at these photographs that it didn't really even come up for them. But towards the end, I think it finally did for some of these characters.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the very last scenes, I think the very last scene in the book, is her on the Stairmaster at the gym, staring out the window at the rotating Mercedes-Benz star. Right, like on top of the Mercedes-Benz factory. And here, the section I read earlier about her mother, it's repeated but altered a little bit, right? She's talking about being in the gym on this Stairmaster. She's talking about, this is sort of in the context of her, sort of meditating on Berlin as this kind of city with two faces, like the West and the East, and so on.
Like the mayor of Halloween Town.
Wait, Halloween
Did
Town
anyone think to dredge the lake?
Where's Jack?
That's not Halloween Town, man. That's Nightmare Before Christmas.
Well, yeah.
Well, he's the mayor of Halloween Town.
Oh, I'm a freaking millennial, and I thought of my sister's Halloween Town on the Disney Channel, which is a movie.
There's only 365 days till next Halloween. 365.
Halloween Town is
breath.
Worms ward. Where's the worms ward?
Jack. Dude, me and my brother always do the skipped worms. Worms. Where?
I oddly love him, like seeing him drink the soup. It's a very satisfying thing. And when she uses the spoon and it goes through the holes.
Oh, classic trick.
So
Scrumptious.
One of the best moments in
it's one of the best
history.
movies of all time.
Legendary. Legend.
Where were we?
I was just talking about her in the gym because she's
Right.
talking about Berlin as this kind of two-faced city, like the mayor of Halloween Town.
That's right. Okay.
So she says, female samurai come here. Strong, slender young women with perfect muscles, smooth, set jaws, and inscrutable expressions, so different from me. 1, 2, 1, 2, we march in a row. We, moving dolls, each determines our own rhythm. The three-pronged metal star revolves slowly. Its rotation puts me into a hypnotic half-sleep. The metal goddess, like a laser, strokes the rough scars of the city, reconciles times and the different sides of the world, the past and the present, west and east. I hear my heart beating in the darkness. Pit-pat, pit-pat. I feel touched, as though there were a lost mouse inside it, beating in fright against the walls. Somewhere, far behind me, the landscape of my deranged country is ever paler. Here, in front of me, are steps that lead to nowhere. I'm just like, fuck. That sucks.
Fuck.
But again, right? Like, that's the thing, right? Because that line about the mouse in your heart, heartbeat. That's repeated from her imagining her mother staring out a different window at the people smoking, and here she is staring out the window at the sort of smoking factories of Berlin and having the same sort of sensation.
Dog, I killed a mouse yesterday.
Did you really?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
How?
It was
James,
eating.
your
It was eating.
fists?
It was eating stuff in the house and shitting in drawers, and I had
Like
to
they do.
I had to put a stop to it. I put a trap in one of the drawers that I know it liked, and I got it yesterday. And
Oh,
its
what a
little-
big man you are.
No, I was sad, and I
okay.
and I had to go bash it with a hammer because it was
Was it still alive?
because its little back was broken by the trap, but it was still alive.
God, that's tough.
That sucks.
And I can't. I could barely do it.
Yeah.
wow, this podcast is definitely anti-suffering, by the way.
So I'm basically
We are.
like
We're
I'm basically the same as Dubravka Ugresic,
Yes.
I believe, in terms of the hardships I also endure.
oh my god.
I see that mouse's little pleading eyes every night when I go to
well,
sleep.
one thing
Yes.
about the mouse too. Remember, I mean, one chapter we haven't talked about is the older lesbian couple that, and one is just like obsessed with like wearing Mickey Mouse clothing or like.
Oh my god, that's such a weird little yes.
I actually, maybe no spoilers, but since we haven't talked about it, I would love to dive deep into that one. Maybe that'll be a Patreon only video
Ooh.
because I think there's a lot of
all right.
like Freudian elements in that one
Ooh, that's pretty
that I would
spicy.
love to talk about and that were confusing, and I would like to talk about that.
Not to, I mean, I got nowhere to be, but
Ugresic also just talks about the Freudian elements,
Yeah.
the sort of
Yeah.
dream interpretation stuff with that. You know, she's like, I don't know, but you know, if Freud were to say it, you know, she's being kind of like funny about it. She's like, listen, I got no horse in this race, but if Freud were to say anything, he would kind of say that it's a cock and
Yeah, well, what at the very end of the chapter they talk about clitoral circumcision
yes.
and how one of the female partners, her partner, goes on like sexual escapades with men, and I thought that there was definitely some Freudian stuff going on there.
for sure. And this is why Ugresic is canceled.
Yeah, that one chapter.
I mean, any association with Freud is cancelable at this
Right,
point.
yeah.
But I also think, right, like the Disney and the sort of Mickey Mouseification, right, like that goes into this,
Yeah.
Question about commodification and like the creation of objects that are imbued with
Fandom.
meaning. Yeah, and fandom, absolutely, and sort of like getting these little. And there was a moment I can't remember, but she specifically uses the phrase and talks about fetish objects, right, and trying to distinguish like objects that. Yeah, exactly. Matt's pointing to his Toy Story 5 background. Oh boy. But distinguishing between these objects that we generally imbue or genuinely imbue with meaning, and the ones that we sort of fetishize out of some kind of habit or out of some kind of ritual, and I think she's trying to draw a sort of implicit distinction between those two things, because I think like I don't know. I mean, shit. I don't know if you guys know people like this, but I know fucking way too many people who are like adult, literal Mickey Mouse hat wearing, like go to Disney like 3 times a year.
Disney people.
Disney people.
That's a whole genre of folks,
Dude.
and it's increasing.
Dude. And I think that she's sort of making, I don't think she's necessarily making this point about Disney, but like making a point about, the difference between these kind of like fetish objects that we kind of use as kind of like sinks for meaning, like wells for meaning, that like I don't need any real meaning. I have Mickey Mouse, right? And that's distinct from, a photograph or something that your grandmother owned or like whatever. It becomes this sort of idol that you use as a like black hole for all of your own emptiness.
It reminds me of Zizek's commodity fetishism, right? Where he talks about, he also talks about like an example where this guy has his wife dies and is from like breast cancer or something, and he's seems to be totally fine. Like his friends are talking to him and he's totally okay, and they're like wondering why he isn't distraught and crying and whatever. And it turns out that he has this hamster that his wife bought, and the hamster died like 4 months later, and that was his fetishized item. It was kind of reminds me of like a hoarder too.
It's like John Wick.
Go on.
His wife died.
Is John Wick a hoarder?
No, his wife died, and he had the dog that his wife left him. And
I've never actually seen John Wick.
The Russian guys kill the dog, and then that's John Wick
the pain
set him
comes
off,
to
but
the
that set
surface.
him off, and then he's like, okay, finally the last remaining fetish object is gone, so now I'm gonna kill 100+ people.
And that's Mickey Mouse for Americans.
And that's Mickey Mouse. I also think of I would like to think of this was something I thought of when I was seeing a therapist. Was
King,
the idea,
mental health is important. Everyone go see therapists.
Right, and
USSRI.
This is not. CCCP, which is CC, a psychiatrist.
Oh my god. Yes.
This is not like a downtrodden of seeking therapy, but just like the way I conceived of it a lot of the time, especially when it didn't feel like a lot of progress was being made, or it was just like sort of like chronic skipping record kind of thing, it felt like I was draining a chronic cyst, and it felt it was just a relief of pressure, but not an actual the shit was not being solved. And that's also something I think of when I think of like what you were describing, like voids and fetish objects in which to deposit excess feeling and meaning without ever really like solving the problem of why that keeps occurring.
And that's the power of them, right? Like, and that's why people get so attached to these images, or Mickey Mouse, or these objects, is because like they know that even if they can't articulate it or they can't say it, that is where all of their meaning is. It's somehow in that. It's in that thing. It's been deposited in that object, and that object is sort of holding it for them. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And if they lose it, if it breaks, if it disappears, if they can't visit Disney every year or whatever it is, that
if someone criticizes it,
exactly, then implicitly that meaning and all of that energy that they've invested in it, that will somehow dissipate too, and with it their identity to some degree.
Right, and that's national, or that's something as simple as Mickey Mouse.
Yeah,
or a photograph.
But I think she's making. I think she's trying to, like, thread a needle between. Like, I don't think she's saying Mickey Mouse is the same as the photograph. I think
no.
The photograph is the thing that is. Like, there's a difference between objects that like suck and hold meaning, and then there's objects that generate and create meaning. And I think that the sort of like photographs and some of these items that she tends to find are at the flea markets and stuff are generative rather than subtractive.
I think you're right. I think there is a distinction between the two. I think maybe if you hold on to some childhood object like a Mickey Mouse or something that is a little more glaringly imposing on your emotions than a photograph would. But I do think that she still is critical of the consummation of and the hoarding of old photographs. I still believe that.
No, I think you're right. Matt, did you have a passage?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, like, because I think there's like a sort of inverse proposition here, which I think the photographs offer like a good, example of. And this is sort of right before Alfred the Angel comes into play. But there's this whole segment where, Ugresic is talking about her friends and how they sort of loosely relate to tarot cards, and she's talking about they throw cards, quote unquote, and they do the tarot, and it's kind of like sort of a joke, like kind of a ironic act by these educated women who meet every now and again, but also it's not. And she describes it this way: tarot was nothing other than a kind of alternative literature in which the strength of the text depended on the power of the interpreter and the imagination of the reader. So, kinds of flips it. It's hell yeah, dude. Gabe also underlined that. We're so in sync.
Oh my god, underline it with me.
Sync up.
Sync up, underline it, daddy.
If boys all live in the same apartment for long enough, they underline the same text.
And they
Holy shit.
and they become in sync together, and then they form a boy band
Yeah.
called In Sync.
Boar band.
Holy fuck.
A boar band.
Oh my god.
But the point being that like there's the inverse of what is it? It's like something is only as powerful. Some things are powerful because they can meet whatever level of meaning both the interpreter and the people engaged with it want to give it.
Right.
Like there's no limit to that.
Yes.
I don't know. That's not a distinctly different thing from like, you know, the extent to which you can derive meaning from certain objects. But it's more. I was just trying to link it to what you were describing with like the fetish objects and stuff. It's like these things will just continually meet like a goldfish growing in a bowl. You know, they'll just fill the size of their container no matter what it is. Whatever you got to give it, it will meet that for you and become loom ever larger.
Yes, and therefore make it that much more difficult to let go of, you know.
Right.
And it takes essentially in that story, which like I feel like we have not even conveyed the weirdness of yet. Like it's them meeting as these college friends and doing the tarot cards, and then literally a literal angel shows up, and he's like, "Oh, I fucked up. I was supposed to prevent a car accident, and I didn't." And
I feel bad.
And I feel
so
bad.
I'm here now.
And they're like, "What?" And then he does like some random angel shit and lifts them off the ground, and then gives everyone other than the narrator a feather, and they forget the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
It's
anyway,
basically an episode of. It was a chapter about Chris Angel. That's how I read it.
Yeah, of course.
yes, my
Blew their
favorite
minds with a bunch of magic.
my favorite thing about the tarot card section is that she just includes as its own paragraph this one sentence. They're talking about tarot cards and, you know, spiritual life and all that, and she just includes this one sentence, and it's its own separate paragraph. We considered horoscopes vulgar. We had nothing to do with them.
Nice.
That's right. That's beyond the pale.
And I just thought that was so funny because, you know, again, it's
Horoscopes
like,
is basic bitch shit. We do tarot here.
Exactly. We on some real witchy shit.
Yeah.
I think we're winding down. I do want to maybe dive a little bit into the.
You
I
can't
just
tell me
want
what
to
to
read
do, Paul.
one section of the My Grandmother in Heaven. I just want to read it,
Please.
and relate it to Gene Stafford a little bit.
Please.
This is at the very beginning. This is her describing her grandma. She was not tall. She had large, heavy breasts on a small, round body with narrow shoulders and a protruding belly. Her graying, curly hair framed her broad face with its prominent Asiatic cheekbones. She had greenish eyes, slightly slanting, a vaguely absent look, like that of a seriously ill or very old. On her face, her smile seemed to take the place of an expression. She smiled broadly, obligingly, and for no reason. I didn't like her. Perhaps it was that smile without reason I didn't like, that ever-ready cordiality, that nodding of her head which made her gray curls quivering like springs. I felt that she wore the smile on her face as a kind of apology for existing at all. She humored people with that smile, as though why she existed was precisely what everyone was wondering. And this to jump ahead for one little last section, 2 pages later. I didn't like my grandmother, the way children dislike or like for no reason. I didn't succeed in loving her even later. And as though I had remembered that childlike dislike, I maintained it with childlike persistence even as an adult.
Yeah.
I really like that. But yeah, it made me think of Gene Stafford a little bit. Just being able to get in the mind of a child where you just like something rubs you the wrong way that you don't even totally understand.
She captures childhood like really well, and like her descriptions of her childhood in her, you know, childhood town where she lived with her mother, and yeah.
That is the downfall of, and I'm forgetting her name, but the sister in that story.
Molly.
Basically. Yeah, Molly. Just like hold a grudge like a motherfucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and they accumulate, and she's unable to deal with it.
The reason I found this one just as like depressing as all the passages about her mom is that the grandma she had even less of a chance. She was the first generation, I think, and she was even more torn down by the situation and by life, so that she didn't have the ability to even smile without showing what has happened to her and what life has done to her. And her grandchild just like hated her for it, just for being who she was and who she is someone affected by circumstances. So I just found it very relatable, but also just horribly sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's reduced to, again,
Yeah,
like I
there's
was
a
saying, like
reduction.
these phrases of her mother's and stuff, and she even describes her mother as having a reductive understanding of her mother. And Ugresic knows this, but just like that's what she has to work with.
Right.
And so she can't help it. She doesn't like her grandmother. She understands that it's based off of pretty lacking data, and yet it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Doesn't matter.
Sucks.
Yeah. And I like how she said even later in life she didn't find a love for her. Even when she understood these things about circumstance, she still couldn't bring herself to do it.
And I've been there.
Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think like, I think the description of maybe the section that I like felt most the sort of was the most distinct for me was her description of the party with her friends, and then the description of her kind of running through them. I don't know enough about tarot to understand the meanings of the sort of like designations that she assigns to each of her friends. So it's like a group of college friends, these women who get together to do these tarot parties, and then this angel shows up, and then they forget all about it. But there's like some really sort of, and the title of that section is group photograph, because she has this one picture that she thinks may have been taken that night, but it's all whited out and fucked up, and it doesn't really show anything except like some vague outlines, and she thinks that the angel was in the picture and that's why it didn't turn out. But there's just so many strange, again, this is the sort of magical realism element that we've mentioned, where each of them takes the feather back to their house and does something to their home and does something with it, and then forgets about it the next morning and is sort of surprised to see that they still have it. One woman eats it when she goes home in front of her husband, and it sort of like disgusts him in this weird way, and then she winds up becoming pregnant relatively soon after, and as she's sort of like blessed by this angel figure, and then she revisits these women during the wartime and sort of talks through them as their sort of tarot analogs, which again I don't understand. But did y'all make anything of that section overall? Like, was it just another sort of a way of getting into, loss and memory and friendship, or I don't know. I kind of want to just talk about it a little bit briefly.
That was kind of the jack of the cards or something. Oh, that's a bad analogy, but it kind of threw a wrench into what I believe the angels were for me. It added another element to it that I was like, I just couldn't really decipher. It kind of turned my theory on its head a little bit. Like, what does the angel potentially getting one of them pregnant mean in terms of loss or memory or like a fall from grace? I don't really see a connection there. So I don't know what you think, Gabe or Matt, but I'm kind of at a loss for it.
I think Ugresic acknowledges the angel as a device she made up at some point to just be like, I bless my friends in my way with this fantastical element to the story. So I think she acknowledges that it is just a device. So, it is just a device that she's using to describe a more grounded sensation that she can't give voice to as easily in any other way. And then I just think it's more like, yet again, like the narrator, Dubravka Ugresic is kind of you're getting a sense of her via the negative space around her. And therefore, once you've talked about family, you got to talk about friends. Like close friendships and relationships, these are the ways in which you're going to be able to sort of define yourself, because you're too close to yourself in a lot of ways. So like, I don't know, like the best method is to be like, here's how I'm at my friends as reflections largely of myself, because I'm remembering them, are the best ways in which to talk about me. And that's kind of how I thought. It's cute and it's not. You know what I mean? It's like these aren't accurate in any way, probably representations of these other women. And I think Ugresic knows that. But, yeah.
I think I found that section that you were mentioning, Matt, where she kind of acknowledges the angel device. She says, she's just sort of recollecting this. Perhaps that's how it was, and perhaps it was different. Perhaps invisible, incorporeal, and anonymous angels long to leave an imprint and reflection, to have someone describe them. If that's how it is, then our Alfred, which was the name of the angel, certainly could not have counted on appearing to a Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He had appeared to me. And something else, the phrase, behind God's back, or where God said goodnight, is used to describe places forgotten by God. The first assumption is that he would not send angels, or at least not angels of substance, to places where he had decided to say goodnight. Perhaps that is how it was, and perhaps it was different. Who can tell? Angels were invented by grown-up people to make life more bearable. Writers are grown-up people who like inventing things.
Right.
That's why I gave them an angel, a little something to make life more bearable. And I know it has turned out feeble, but an angel is only as good as his writer. Still, just in case, I have left each of them a little feather so that real angels can find them in that terrible divine darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think,
I just had one more passage that I wanted to read.
Please.
That I just, no convenient place to put it in our conversation, but here it goes. This is a sort of more direct reference to Yugoslavia and war. It goes, the lords of war, the lords of dreams, the attraction of a neuromancy, of every kind of fortune-telling, all reading of the future, is not hidden in the text of the dream, but in its interpretation. In that sense, any text at all, including a recipe for a cheese soufflé, may be read as a prediction of the future, or, later, as its fulfillment. That is quite clear to fortune-tellers and rulers, emperors, and their informers, politicians, and psychoanalysts, which is why there are such close links between them. That felt to me, just struck me as something more close to the bone of her making a large-scale summary there.
Right.
Which
Because
I think is a negative assessment of that very phenomenon.
Yes. Yep.
That's it for me.
Well,
You're out. See ya.
3 strikes and you're out. Bye. Thanks for playing. Do we do that? There's so many characters in this book.
I don't
Why
know.
don't we should just do the narrator.
I guess, yeah. What about her mom? We could do maybe her mom.
Yeah, we got maybe enough material for her, and you know what she is.
Puff.
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 So disrespectful sounding. After all of this,
Guys,
like, heart-rending shit, we're like, Hufflepuff.
By the way, welcome to the segment, the crowd favorite, the fan favorite segment, where we indulge our Harry Potter brains in a exercise called We Literally Just Read Another Book, and therefore we're going to put the characters from that book into their Harry Potter houses.
I can't wait to die, and if I'm lucky, somebody I've never met once in my life and who's not even speaks my language is like, he's a Hufflepuff. You're like, cool. Talk about memory distorting reality.
Oh my god.
But she is.
But she is. The mom is a Hufflepuff. The mom is a Hufflepuff. She's loyal. She's sentimental. She's, I don't know.
It's hard to classify any of these characters for me because they are such victims of circumstance that it affected their personality. So like, it feels almost mean to do it to a lot of them. So I think it's good really doing it to the two.
No, I think that's a good point.
This is the first time I felt
Ravenclaw.
like. Oh yeah, she's a Ravenclaw.
I think the author's Ravenclaw.
She's
and it's
Ravenclaw,
not just
though.
because she's an academic, but
No. Ruthless inquiry, though, is a thing. But
yes, exactly. All right, well, that was easy. Scores?
Scores.
4.1.
In tradition, I will go last here.
4.1.
Easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna might go a little higher than that. I mean, for me as a reader, this kind of hit all the marks that I like, but it was also a really challenging book to read for me. It was like a perfect sweet spot for me at this moment in my reading career, where it pushed my comprehension abilities while, having literary elements that I really enjoy, like great characterizations. It was one of the first like sporadic, books that had a lot of different sections that I really enjoyed. I usually don't like that. I'm kind of a simpleton and like my linear stories, but this definitely pushed me out of my boundaries in a good way. But yeah, great writing, great passages, great characterizations, really beautiful writing overall. I'm gonna have to do 4.7.
Oof.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm in that ballpark too. I think I'm on the other side of 4.5. So like, again, yeah, I think it, like you said, Paul, it just worked. Like it was just a mix that just worked perfectly, and the balance was struck in a way that was like so effective for me and so affecting. I teared up at parts of this book. I was like that part of that I read about her mother. I almost teared up just reading it again now. So yeah, I'm gonna go just tipping over the 4.5 mark, like 4.53 for me.
I'm changing. Can I change mine to 4.3?
Yeah,
you guys
of
are
course.
fucking right.
Hell yeah!
It's not just peer pressure. I'm just a curmudgeon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean I'm trying to be more curmudgeonly in these scores in general, but like there's some that I would probably change if I went back, but I think this is a considered judgment that this rises to that level.
This is definitely one of this is uniquely good. I really like this a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm a little polar with my scores usually, and but I just had to take into account the other books we've read so far and how this one affected me. So it's got to be up there. I mean, I almost liked it as much as the Mountain Lion, so it's got to be up to 4.7 for me.
Mountain Lion, good. I'm glad you liked it, Paul, because I was a little worried about the kind of like, because I know, like you said, like and it's not a whatever statement of value. It's just you like a good story, and I was like nervous about how you would take the writing style.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the first maybe 5 innings of it, I was like, whoa, this is getting hard to get into, but 6th and 7th inning stretch, I really, it hit a triple and then a home run inside the park. So.
Hell yeah! All right, well, if you're listening still at this point in the episode, you will love our Patreon. So go over there.
It's this but more.
It's this but more and less also somehow.
Sure.
In the sense that they're shorter videos generally. But go check out the Patreon, patreon.com/spinecracker. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook,
All that.
MySpace.
Snapchat.
Yeah.
Not
GeoCities.
on MySpace. GeoCities. Yeah, what's the dumbest social media platform that we could make an
Vero.
account on? Okay, I don't even know what that is. So there you go.
Vero.
Zack Snyder's on it.
What is? Oh, okay.
It's like an Instagram knockoff that took off for like 2 months and then died.
All right, well, we're on that. We're gonna be on that. We're gonna be on. We're gonna be on whatever the conservative one was that got shut down. We're gonna be on
LiveJournal.
LiveJournal. We're gonna have LiveJournals.
Tumblr.
We're gonna have Zangas.
Yeah.
Go follow us everywhere, wherever you get your social media information. And any last words, boys?
Good night and good luck.
Great book. Read this book. Good night.
Bye.
Good night and good luck.